Valley girl. The topic at hand is from Mark Levin, and unfortunately his video doesn't actually have a lot of animation. It's just him talking like a radio show, but we're gonna be responding to it anyway. This is Mark Levin. All right. Now, Mark Levin, I want to say he's an interesting human being. But up until now, I didn't know this human being actually existed at all. What I do know about him is what I can pull up on various wikis, and that is that he's an American author, he's a lawyer, and he's a right-wing radio personality, so he's very good at convincing you of his opinion, because that's literally his job. His job as both a radio host and as a lawyer is to convince a group of people that you should listen to him. Apparently, he's also a colossal blowhard. That is from Rationale Wiki. Now, Rationale Wiki is not the best source for most things, but if you do want a crass and biased explanation of things that will make you laugh, Rationale Wiki is usually pretty good for that. Apparently, he is a right-wing constructionist, but I don't want to poison that well too terribly much. Let's get into him himself. Before I do that, though, Growlithe, are you... Growlithe, are you okay? You okay, Growlithe? I don't think she's okay. I don't think she's alright. And with that, we should actually be back. Sorry that took so long. Had to make sure she had a chance to go out and pee, and then stick her in the gay baby jail for a little bit. Because otherwise the stream is just going to be Growlithe barking over and over again. Which I'm sure there's a subset of my audience that would like. But, till then, let's take a look at Mark Levin and his opinion on why healthcare is not a right.
I watched some of these hearings today, and they were disgusting. Radical leftists like Bernie Sanders.
First of all, if you're considering Bernie Sanders a radical leftist, just gonna throw this out right now. If you think Bernie's a radical leftist, then you have no idea what the political spectrum is. Because Bernie is a social democrat. Or a democratic... He says he's a democratic socialist. Realistically, his policies seem more along the lines of social democracy, which is not far left. It's not far left in any case. Also, thank you very much, Def Knox, for the $2 super chat. Winky face, wonk, wink, wonk, wink, wonk, wink, wonk, winky face. But, anywho, further to the left of Bernie would be actual forms of socialism. And then further to the left of socialism would be various forms of communism. Bernie is not a radical leftist. A radical leftist would be a communist. Would be... I am more socialistic than Bernie Sanders in the way that I consider my politics. If Bernie is a radical, then I must be a blatant extremist. But if your politics, if your Overton window is so far shifted to the right that anything that is slightly to the center is considered the left, then yeah, Bernie would be considered the radical left as when we consider your Overton window. But if we consider the United States next to literally almost every country in existence, Bernie would be like a moderate centrist in those countries. But here, where our Overton window is so far to the right, he's a radical leftist, apparently.
Radical leftists demanding that Trump's nominees agree with their left-wing kook agenda. And the big one, of course, is climate change. Because, as you all know, the whole purpose of that hoax is to, in essence, nationalize the economy through the back door. Not in one big swoop, but just endless cuts to the...
Okay, so... before he even gets into the healthcare argument, which granted he's got about a 10-minute video here, so of course there's plenty of time to get into the healthcare part of the argument. But we're beginning with Mark trying to say that climate change is a hoax. Now, here's the funny thing. You get people that say that climate change is a conspiracy on the one hand in order to add more power to the government where they can give taxes to people and tax us via our carbon emissions, etc. Here's the funny thing, though. At the end of the day, if we actually look at the science where climate change is concerned, most climate scientists agree, so scientists who actually study that field. This is not like saying a right-wing political person agrees with a stance. You can't claim bias in this way because as opposed to a right-wing extremist or a right-wing political opinion being based on somebody's biases, being a climate scientist is not based on biases. That is based on having a focused field of study. You disagreeing with the consensus of most scientists who work in the fields where climate is concerned, that does not reek to me of somebody who's got a stable disposition here. That reeks to me of somebody who's conspiracy-minded. Now, granted, there could be an agenda. There's nothing saying there cannot be an agenda to use the fact of climate change in order to levy taxes on people and oppress them that way. There's nothing that's saying that that cannot be the case. However, when you try to argue that climate change is a hoax because people will try to profit off of it and exploit the people, then I would have to argue that by that logic, McDonald's is a hoax because it uses exploitative advertising and tries to profit off of the people. The mere fact that something is attempting to profit off of people or profit off of a problem does not mean the problem doesn't exist. As an example, this is actually from a book, but if you've ever read the book World War Z, not the movie is nothing like what happens in the book. The book is actually very analytical on stuff like this. Taking the book, there is a vaccine that is made for a disease called African rabies, because at the time in the book, the zombie virus in the book of World War Z was being called African rabies because the people did not yet understand what it was, much like climate change where people go, oh, it's snowing outside, the climate's not actually changed, even though that has nothing to do with climate. You're talking about the weather. People in that story did not understand what was going on, so they threw in the name African rabies because they knew that it probably came somewhere from Africa and it gave people symptoms like rabies, so we'll call it African rabies. As a result, in the book, a hyper-capitalistic company swooped in and created a vaccine for an African rabies and made thousands of dollars marketing it to the people. They were basically selling false hope because the actual disease that was killing everybody wasn't African rabies. The fact that an organization came in to profit off of everybody's misfortune and sell false hope didn't suddenly mean that the problem that they were addressing in selling that and exploiting the people didn't exist. Now, I know that story's fiction, but it's not like stuff like that hasn't happened before. I know it's still giving the call-in messages. I'm trying to fix that. Give me a second. Disable the call-in message. All right. There we go. That one has been disabled. So, anywho, point being, you cannot argue that because people are profiting off of a thing, that the thing doesn't now exist, right? I play League of Legends. League of Legends exists. Riot Games is constantly profiting off of it. I would argue that after Tencent took over, Riot Games is probably trying to profit of it more than originally was their due. And yet, it still exists. Your thing exists irregardless of who's profiteering off of it.
The EPA and so forth. Also a massive transfer of wealth from our country to other countries, from our industries to foreign industries. It's just... If you read Plunder and Deceit, or if you've heard me talk about it, there's an entire chapter on this. This comes out of the left. It comes out of Europe. Like the entire progressive movement came out of Europe. Marxism came out of Europe. The Third Reich.
Oh my God. Wait, hold on.
It came out of Europe and so...
Marxism came out of Europe and the Third Reich came out of Europe. Okay? This is like... Let me explain why this particular logic is stupid. But why people will find it convincing. When you say socialism comes from Europe, Marxism comes from Europe, the Third Reich came from Europe, the first thing that you hear with that... Also, before that, we have a $2 super chat. EYTPS says, respond to the comments to this vid too, please. Okay, I will take a look at the comments as well. But when you make an argument like that, what you are attempting to do is create an association, right? You're trying to say, oh, Marxism came out of Europe, so the Third Reich came out of Europe. This is the ShamWow commercial levels of bottom of the barrel. Does anybody remember the ShamWow commercial? ShamWow, it's made from Germans. You know, the Germans always make good stuff. This is the gambler's fallacy. The rate at which a thing has happened in the past says nothing about the rate at which it will continue to happen in the future. When you have someone like Mark Levin, who tries to convince his audience by saying Marxism and the Third Reich came out of Europe, first of all, Europe has a lot of really diverse countries. It doesn't matter that Marxism and the Third Reich came out of Europe, because Europe's a big fucking place. Moreover, I can use this argument against him. He's a right-wing conservative talk show host. I would imagine that that means that he is also probably Christian, right? I do not see anything in his bio about him being Christian, but let's go ahead and assume that he is, because it will drive this point home fairly well. So, if Mark Levin says Christianity is what the West needs to succeed, I will say, oh my God, that came out of the Middle East. Why do we need what the Middle East has for the West? You know what else came out of the Middle East? Islam. And just like that, the entire conservative Christian right wing goes nuts. Even though I haven't said anything untrue. Now, we can extrapolate further and then grab the anti-Semites in there as well, because then we can say, you know what also came out of there? Judaism. And then suddenly the anti-Semites are on board. But not for a good reason. You're on board for a stupid reason. The geographical location in which an idea originated has nothing to do with the validity of the idea, and the geographical location that an idea originated has nothing to do with an idea that comes from an approximate location geographically to the other idea. It says nothing at all. All of us came out of Africa, and yet this ding-dong's an idiot. I mean, I'm an idiot too. But at the end of the day, you're trying to do this guilt by association thing, associate all these things. Now everything that comes out of Europe is bad. Now if we try to emulate any successful program that came out of Europe, we can immediately say that it's bad. You can use this kind of argument to say that nobody should love dogs, be vegetarian, or commit themselves to artwork, because those are all things that Hitler did in his life. No one should ever write a book, because that's the thing that Hitler did in his life. No one should ever aspire to be a politician, because that's the thing that Hitler did in his life. At the end of the day, that reasoning, trying to take any idea and mix it together in this way, is a genetic fallacy. You are arguing that people should be basing their presumptions on an idea based on the source of where it came from, and then you have a guilt by association fallacy and a gambler's fallacy on top of that because of the other approximate ideas coming from those areas geographically.
Forth and so on. These are all alien to the American heritage and experience, but it doesn't matter because the left is
Marxism is alien to America? I'm fairly certain that we actually have workers' unions, and workers' unions are a thing that Marx was very much for. Last I checked, that's not alien to the American experience. Also, when you say that things from Europe are alien to the American experience, do you know what's from Europe? Americans! Literally, Americans are from Europe! We came from Europe and immigrated here. Violently. And yet, there are a few people who will take this and run with it.
Alien to the American heritage and experience. So they seek to destroy this society from within. Even if they're senators or congressmen, it doesn't matter. That's what they seek to do, and that's what they are doing, frankly, and they've succeeded greatly. Now, Bernie Sanders is a pathetic, old-time Marxist. That's what he is. I don't care what...
He's not a Marxist, though. What? That's... Wait. Oh my god, Lindsay, you're gonna get the song stuck in my head. You're gonna get the song stuck in my head. Bernie Sanders is not a Marxist. Bernie Sanders' policies are an attempt to bring democratic socialism, or social democracy, depending on where you want to be pedantically. It's an attempt to bring those policies that allow people to have a good base of living, just a baseline. That's it. Marxism would be arguing that that is part of a transition to then get into communism. But Bernie's not a communist. Since the 60s and 70s, which, by the way, is back when Bernie was politically active as well, since the 60s and 70s, there has been an understanding in academic circles that socialism can be its own thing separate from communism. Marx argued hundreds of years ago that communism was an end goal and socialism was a transitory state between state power and power of the working class. Or rather, oligarchical power and power of the working class. There wasn't much of a difference in some of his literature. He mainly painted everything on the opposite end as bourgeoisie. However, again, since the 60s and 70s, there's been an understanding that, things that we label as socialism can exist simultaneously in a capitalistic society. George Cosma brings up a good point. Bernie Sanders is barely even a socialist because none of his policies deal with workers' unions. Well, some of his policies do deal with workers' unions. He is very pro-workers' union. But I do understand the point there. This is why at the beginning of the video, I pointed out that Bernie is to the right of a socialist. A socialist believes that the workers should control the means of production, and there is no reason to have a CEO in a company. And in many cases, that the leader of a company can be democratically elected and democratically controlled within the company. Damien says, what is a Marxist? A Marxist would be somebody who argues, this is a very baseline, there's many different types of Marxists. For instance, for an authoritarian Marxist, you can get an ML, a Marxist-Leninist. But a Marxist would be somebody who argues for the ideas of Karl Marx. Not necessarily that they argue for a particular flavor of communism, because Marx didn't argue for a particular flavor of communism. But he did argue that communism would be an end goal, and that socialism would be a transitory state in order to dismantle the power of the bourgeoisie. So a Marxist would be somebody who advocates for a style of communism and a style of socialism being used as a transitory state in the efforts to either reform or revolutionize an economic system. That would be a Marxist. Justin H. says, when will this stream be uploaded? I am uncertain. Justin H. also says, it's stuff like government-funded healthcare socialist, because I've noticed the difference between American and Canadian socialism. So, government-funded healthcare is a social, like, it is technically a socialist policy. It is a social policy because the funding for the healthcare does not come privately. The funding for the healthcare does not come from an individual. The funding for the healthcare is single payer, which means it is coming from society. It is coming socially. The biggest socialist organization in the United States is the U.S. military. It is completely socially funded. For the most part. There's other shit that goes on, but that's neither here nor there. But your military is socially funded. Your military is a socialist program. It is quite literally tax dollars that make the military run, that make their healthcare in the military run, that make everything in the military function. That is socialist. If you are against social healthcare, but you are for the military, you're pro-military, you are engaging in cognitive dissonance. Am I saying Trump is a socialist? No, I think Trump is fascist adjacent. Trump is literally trying to get rid of some fucking meal policies for kids. He's actually trying to actively strip away social funding from different programs. Yes, Trump increased the military budget. Cognitive dissonance is a thing. I just mentioned that. And I'm not trying to be a dick when I say it that way. I'm saying that there are people who are not socialist, but are incredibly pro-military, like Trump, and to be so is to engage in a level of cognitive dissonance, because you are using socialist mannerisms, socialist tendencies, to build something different. Like, it's a level of cognitive dissonance that one has to engage in order to get to the point where they don't realize that they advocate for a socially funded organization when it's the military, but when it's civilian healthcare, then we shouldn't get it or we don't deserve it for some reason.
What anybody else says. And the guy came in a close second in the Democrat primary for president, and then the populist nationalists say, we ought to try and work with those people in a coalition. I don't understand that argument at all. No, we need to defeat these people because they're out to defeat us. They're out to destroy our society.
So, this is a very common conservative talking point, where you don't need to defeat somebody because they themselves actually are arguing for anything bad. You need to defeat somebody because they're your enemy. Axiomatically, they're your enemy. Therefore, you must go against them. You must attack them. You must defeat them. You must rally with us in an effort to defeat them. If you want to argue that you should defeat someone, it should not be because they're trying to beat you. It should be because they have a particular policy, they have a particular thing that you want to argue against. You cannot argue that the enemy is the enemy axiomatically. There has to be a reason why they're the enemy. Why is social health care bad? And mind you, social health care can exist in a world that also has private health care. New Zealand has this system. You can go to a private healthcare clinic if you want to be like an American and go to a private one, or you can get your healthcare through the state and do it that way. But if you have healthcare through the state, that doesn't mean that you can't also go to the private institution. So before you try to argue that private healthcare is better than social healthcare, I'm arguing that both should be allowed. You want private healthcare? Go for it. You want to be able to afford your health care when you're poor? Go for it. I would like to create a society in which both of these things are viable.
Bernie Sanders at the HHS confirmation hearing today for Tom Price to be Secretary of the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services. Cut 14, go.
The United States of America.
I can't even stand this guy's voice.
It doesn't matter if you can't stand the guy's voice. It literally doesn't matter. Nobody cares. I can't stand your voice, yet I haven't commented on how whiny and nasally you are. You literally exist as a nose.
Go ahead.
The United States of America is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Canada doesn't.
All right, stop, dimwit. It cannot be a right.
Okay.
Because rights are not something that beneficiaries or recipients get as a matter of government dictate.
Actually, yes, they can be. Because we literally have an establishment of human rights that are granted that our government dictates are considered human rights. Like, human rights are whatever we agree as humans human rights are. And one of the rights that humans have, especially here in the States, is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? So, the pursuit of happiness and life. Do you know what aids a lot in the pursuit of happiness? Healthcare. Being able to afford survival. Oh, and on the topic of survival, you have a right to life. It's almost as if having that right to life means that the healthcare that would allow you to survive so that you can maintain having a right to life, or maintain that right to life, would then be covered under that right. Unless you want to argue that people don't actually have a right to life. And last I checked, let's see here. Oh no, Mark Levin, there's nothing here. There's nothing here with Mark Levin about abortion. I wanted to wreck him on that. But there's nothing here, and I'm not going to create an argument where there is not one to be had.
And because you have other human beings, what are you going to do? Enslave them? Force them to service that right?
Okay, so let me just go ahead and say right now that every argument he's making right now is against the military. It is against the fire department. It is against the police force. All right, so as an example, let's say I catch my house on fire right now. So I take my phone and I call the fire department. And if the dingus on the end of the line of the fire department goes, what, do you think you're going to enslave us? Do you think you're going to tell us that we need to come save you? No! Your house is not your right. You don't have a right to our services. You don't have that. What are you going to do? Force us to come help you? Let's say if that was the conversation that happened when I picked up that phone and called the fire department, right? If that was the conversation that happened there, then my argument would be, why the fuck do we even have a fire department? What's the point of it? What's the point of my taxes going in to a department that is not going to aid me? This is the same thing that you get where healthcare is concerned. If I need healthcare and my healthcare is covered under my taxes, then it is almost as if every argument that supports the fire department, the police department, the National Guard, the military, every argument that supports every one of those institutions can then be put in for healthcare. But for some reason, when it's healthcare, we get to play fallacy bingo. And we get the special pleading fallacy because healthcare is different. And if he's staunchly pro-life, which seems to be what Cahill is saying, if he is staunchly pro-life, then I would argue that he has to be pro-healthcare because healthcare is literally one of the things that allows you to maintain being alive. Unless he wants to change his stance from pro-life to pro-birth, which I think is more accurate.
They're doctors or nurses or janitors at hospitals. And this crap about it being a right, ask the vets at the VA. If their rights in government-controlled Soviet-style healthcare is being serviced properly. Oh, it's a right. Ask people on any level of government healthcare. If they can see their doctors on time, if they can see specialists on time.
This waiting argument all the time. You know what the answer to the waiting argument is? You know what the answer to that is? Incentivize people to get an education. Incentivize people to go into the medical fields. Instead, what we get from a lot of conservatives, a lot of them, and I'm not saying this is just a Mark Levin thing, is we get people arguing that you don't need to go to college because college is an indoctrination mill that turns you into a leftist. Wow, it's almost as if the more educated you get, the less conservative you get. What a fucking coincidence. But here's the thing. When you have a system, like the private system we have right now, where people can't get help because they can't afford it, functionally, what's the difference between them waiting for it and then being able to get it eventually, or not being able to get it at all because they can't afford it? It's almost as if you're arguing that waiting to die is better. If you have socialized healthcare, you can functionally create more positions where people can get help, as opposed to just private healthcare, which requires, a fucking philanthropist to decide that, oh, we need to have a hospital here? You can actually have a government take a census of the population and go, oh, the population here is 600,000, having one hospital for 15 miles is probably a bad fucking idea. This is one of those things that the private free market is supposed to be able to fix, but it doesn't. Your private free market works for things like computers. It works for things like pens. It works for things like phones. I can choose what phone I want to get because there is a private market that allows me to have competition that cuts the cost and increases the quality of all the products that I could potentially buy. That doesn't work very well for healthcare, though, because unlike a phone, unlike a computer, unlike a TV, unlike various higher forms of food, where healthcare is concerned, if I'm currently hemorrhaging blood, I don't have time to shop around. I don't have the ability to shop around, nor do I have the care for it. I'm going to go to whatever happens to be close. And if you happen to have a government institution that says, oh, for every 5 miles there has to be a hospital, and for every 100,000 people there need to be this many doctors on staff, they can put incentives to get people trained in there. Right now, the only incentive you have to do something is to privately incentivize yourself and go pursue money. Go pursue the really high paycheck of being a doctor. But even then, there's a lot of people who end up quit being doctors because you get sued all the fucking time. Healthcare is not something that functions best in the private sector. It functions best when you have a private option and a social option. If you can't evaluate those two things because you don't have time or because the private market failed you, you're not going to sit there and go, well, at least the free market will eventually fix the problem. No, you're going to go to the nearest hospital and suffer because you're hemorrhaging blood. At no point, and granted I'm only 3 minutes in, at no point have I heard him argue why it's not a right. I've only heard him say, look what happens in these places where you wait. People wait under private healthcare. And, Serious Imperial, I know I'm not live on Twitch. The reason I'm not live on Twitch is after reviewing my Twitch partnership. I'm technically not allowed to stream on Twitch at the same time as I stream on YouTube. I technically have to allow a 24-hour buffer between a live stream on Twitch and something going live onto YouTube afterwards that was on Twitch. And as Twitch does provide me not a whole lot of money, but they do provide me a little bit, which helps towards groceries, I don't want to lose my Twitch partnership because of this. And finances have been pretty fucking awful lately. XVDVN says, I wouldn't say public/private option is a good call. The best is to have all the necessities be under public care and anything else is private. So I would say that having all the necessities be under public care, but people who want necessities to be under people who want their necessities covered privately should be able to do so as well. If you happen to be a CEO of a company and you want to go to a private healthcare person, I'm not going to stop you. Like, that's fine.
Oh, it's a right, don't you know? Well, what's a right?
Can you even define a human right?
We never engage these people. We never debate these people. We never expose them. It's a right to have health care. Well, then I would suggest that all you veterans who don't think you're getting the proper care at your veterans hospital, your VA hospital, you make it clear it's a right. And you expect to get care when you want it, when you need it. Because
you're right. You should. We do need reform in the way that the VA services our veterans. 100% agree with that. The VA does not do an adequate job of servicing our veterans. This is true. 110%, this is true. Guess what? You can argue for reform there without trying to take away from anyone else. But this is the problem with this type of logic, the type of conservative logic that Mark Levin wants to provide to his viewers. He provides a black and white fallacy. Look at the VA. Do you want what they suffer through? No, private is better. Fuck the veterans that can't actually afford private health care. We have enough homeless ones as is, but fuck them, I guess. Screw that entire process, apparently. It's almost as if when you create a black and white fallacy, you engage your audience in a way that they can only have black and white thinking. They can only think it's either private or public, and anything in between doesn't exist. And the public one has problems, so we have to go to the private, ignoring all the problems that the private network has. Ignoring the issues we have right now where people can't afford to get necessary medical care. Ignoring the problems we have right now where people die because they can't go to the hospital because they have fucking pneumonia. Ignoring the amount of people that a capitalistic view on healthcare has actually killed. When we ignore all that, sure, private sounds way better than public. It is almost as if creating a third option, creating something that is functionally better than both of the shit show options we've got available to us, is a thing we could do. But finding solutions isn't actually something that Mark Levin seems to want to do. Finding solutions is hard. Finding solutions requires thought. But arguing that the status quo must be maintained at all costs because it's an axiom, that's easy to do.
Because it's a right. And you can quote Bernie Sanders. Now, of course, the doctors and everybody else, the providers, what are they? They have no rights, apparently.
They do have rights. They can quit that job if they want. Much like the police officer can quit his job. Much like the person in the military can quit their job. Much like the person working for the fire department can quit their job. They have to provide a service to you because they signed up to do so. It was their right to sign up to do so, and they can take that away at any point if they so wish. They have the ability to. You can leave the military. Now, granted, with the military, you sign a contract, so you can't really do it at the drop of a hat. But if you signed a health contract to be a medical professional, same thing. Run a recruitment process for the medical field, much like we do for the military. If it works so well to recruit thousands of people in school to go out and murder people for our country, then why can't we do the same thing and recruit just as many people using the same tactics to save lives in our country? Why is that so hard? It shouldn't be. That should actually be a really easy thing to do. We have the infrastructure for it. Literally, just use what we already do with our military. Just do it for healthcare. Questa with the 5,000 says, both the International Human Rights Law and the UN World Health Organization define right to health as part of basic human rights. Correct. They do. I actually have the Health is a Fundamental Human Right page from the World Health Organization up right now. We also have a $5 super chat from Connor Johnson. Thank you very much for that. So Bong Joon-ho's acclaimed drama thriller Parasite won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Have you seen it? No, I haven't, but I have seen the other film that is contending for Best Picture right now, and that is Sonic the Hedgehog. Do you know how long... We just had a person in the chat, and Tabitha Jade, if you don't mind me saying the thing that you said in chat, I'm going to say it live. Do you know how long, Tabitha Jade, has been waiting for an MRI for a potential tumor in their pituitary gland. 10 years under private healthcare. You know why? They can't afford it. Do you know how long I've been waiting to get a knee brace? Because I have Osgood Slaters and my knees are crumbling under me? A decade. A decade. Because I don't have healthcare. I had healthcare once. It was when I went to go and get my medicine for anxiety and everything else. It was a nice couple months. I am currently in need of medication for depression, medication for anxiety, pain medication for my back, probably. Who knows? I don't know. You know what things I can't get? Those. You know why? Because I can't afford it. Because that's the way our healthcare system works.
It's just so stupid to let the left get away with this stuff all the time. Go ahead.
Major country in Europe does it.
Every major country in Europe treats it as a right. And every major country in Europe sucks. Their healthcare system sucks.
Really? Does it? Does it? Does their healthcare system suck? Moreover, there are healthcare systems that don't suck, that are not in Europe. I mean, take New Zealand's, for instance. From what I've heard, New Zealand's healthcare is pretty fucking great. But when you try to say every healthcare system in the world, besides the American one, sucks, which is basically what you're doing, when the American one sucks, then it seems like all healthcare systems sucks and they all need reform. Woohoo. Interesting. The Stoic 84 said it better than I could. What a thorough and convincing argument, Mr. Levine. What a thorough and convincing argument.
They can't get the kind of care they need in a timely fashion. But it says everything when Bernie Sanders points to Europe. The whole mentality of communism and socialism comes out of Europe.
Wait. Is he going to be one of the types of people that says communism and socialism have never worked ever? And then try to argue that those ideas came from Europe and then try to combine those ideas to say that communistic or socialistic healthcare is in Europe and then say they've never been tried? He hasn't quite done it, but I've seen it done. And it is so confusing when it happens. It's the cognitive dissonance of socialism has never worked. That's socialism. It's working. There's been a break in logic down the line at some point. Something busted.
Centralized, iron-fisted government comes out of Europe. Not America, Europe.
An iron-fisted government, that idea comes out of Europe, not America? Really? Really? Are you aware of how many policies we've had that have tried to enable certain types of, like, fascistic puritanism in America? Last I checked, America's the land of the free in name only.
The widespread misery that our country had to deal with in World War II and I and II came out of Europe.
And that tried to happen here when the American Bund was being established. There was an actual Nazi party in the States, and the only reason that it got abolished is because we decided that communism was more scary and decided to do the whole Red Scare shit. Also, we decided to make a bunch of propaganda against white nationalists, and suddenly the white nationalists in the United States had to jump into their little hidey holes for a little while. Yes, we still have Nazis, they just hide more. But yeah, no, Richard Spencer exists. He does.
We shouldn't seek to copy Europe. Europe should seek to copy us.
So Europe should attempt to go back to being a hyper-imperialized society? No, I think we'll just pass on that. Yeah. We already tried the hyper-imperialism thing once with Britain. Let's not do it again. Please? No. Let's not.
Go ahead.
That healthcare is a right of all Americans, whether they're rich or they're poor. Should people, because they are Americans, be able to go to the doctor when they need to, be able to go into a hospital because they are Americans?
Yes, we're a compassionate society.
No, we are not a compassionate society. In terms of our relationship to poor and working people, our record is worse than virtually any other country on earth.
You are a piece of crap, and you always were a piece of crap.
Wait. So when he brings up an argument about how Americans are actually not as passionate as other countries, which is true because America is an individualistic society as opposed to a community-driven society. Take a society like Japan, which is much more community-driven. You're going to find support networks much easier to come by there because they are not a hyper-individualistic society. We in America are a hyper-individualistic society. We have the tendency to do the whole I got my own type of spiel a lot. Americans are not as hospitable as people would like you to believe. Even the South, which is considered to be the most polite and hospitable place in America, is really only polite and hospitable to your face. But we actually have very polite ways of telling you you're a fucking idiot. If you're in the South and somebody says, bless your heart, they're not actually being kind to you. They're calling you a moron. We LARP kindness. We LARP serenity. We LARP compassionate people. But on the whole, that is not what our legacy has been. Queso with the 5,000. The only guys trying to copy the US is the UK, and the UK just left Europe. Quite telling, isn't it? Lazarus says, bless your heart, I will pray for you. I hope you find Jesus. All things I've heard 1,000 times down here. Since when is the South most hospitable place? Southern hospitality is a meme here in the States. It is. You forgot. Oh, honey. Whenever somebody says something really stupid, oh, honey. Oh, bless your heart. Performative cruelty is the name of the game in the South. But it's performative cruelty under the mask of a smile. Sinister Portman says, why can't I give super chats through PayPal? I do not know. I wish I controlled that. But you are able to send in PayPal donations directly via the Streamlabs or the PayPal link that are in the description if that is what you want to do. Which I am not going to say no to in any way, shape, or form because finances suck. Anyway. Saying somebody's a piece of crap isn't an argument. It's a conclusion to an argument. So let's see if he actually has an argument.
Throwback. Communist throwback. No, we're not a compassionate people, the American people. This just shows you how sick the Democrat Party has gotten. This guy gets 45% of the Democrat vote in their Democrat primaries. And clowns on our side, oh, poor Bernie. Poor Bernie, the primary was stolen from him. Gives a crap about Bernie. No, we're not compassionate society, ladies and gentlemen. Massive redistribution of wealth, massive taxation, massive debt. But it's never enough.
Wait, we have a massive redistribution of wealth? Where? We have healthcare, we have a little bit with the ACA that got botched by Republicans. We have a food stamp program that barely provides, like, at all. We have a welfare program that requires you to jump through 1,000 hoops to actually get and can be exploited. Not by you, mind you, which there are a few people who do exploit welfare, but my point is, we don't have a massive redistribution of wealth. We have a little social safety net, a small one, a barely functional one. That is not a massive distribution of wealth in any way, shape, or form. Also, how's it going, Bionic Dance? Said, you know it would be lovely if YouTube would notify me of streams when they start, or to put it another way, hi, Suris. How's it going, Bionic Dance? The only massive redistribution of wealth we have is through the police force, the military, the fire department, the public education system, all of those things. But one of those I wouldn't say is compassionate. We literally have a murder machine. that we funnel money into. That's not out of compassion at all.
Cook like this nut. Go ahead.
Rate of childhood poverty of any other major country.
All right, stop. Let me help you. Leave it right there. I covered this on Levin TV, but it's necessary to hit it here. BBC News, 3 days ago, where healthcare is a right in Britain, where everybody has yellow teeth because dental care is a right. You just can't get it.
Actually, everybody does not have... Wait, do you realize that you just did a racism? Like, you actually just did a racism right there. The British people having bad teeth is a racial stereotype. That's what that is. Also, fun fact. As it turns out... Oh, that's interesting. Full-time education. How much is dental care in the UK? Let's take a look here. Oh, interesting. So you do actually have to pay for your own health care under the NHS where dental work is concerned. So you mean it's closer to what we have here and therefore their teeth aren't good? Like, again, that's just a stereotype, but let's go ahead and assume it's right. Based on this, their dental care is not fully covered. They have to cover a lot of it on their own. I can arrest a bloodstone for the $5. Says you can't spell beliefs without lie. Jesus was a socialist. This report says I sent you a small donation on PayPal with a note attached. If you could DM me a response on Twitter. Let me take a look here real quick at that. Let's see here. As soon as it'll actually allow me to open up PayPal. It has a tendency to be very slow when I need it to not be. I'm assuming this is the $1 one. I run that on Thursday. Okay. I will get back to you with a response on Twitter then. Send me a DM on Twitter to remind me, though. Because I have a tendency of forgetting things like this. Genova says that you can get the dental funded on the NHS, just not all the procedures are free. Yeah, by what I'm looking at here, there's a Band 1, Band 2, and Band 3 style of charges you can do where certain things are covered. Like in Band 1, you cannot get root canals, for instance, or certain fillings taken care of. But in Band 3, you can get those taken care of, but Band 3 is going to cost you £269 a month. That's what it's looking like on what I'm seeing right now.
Doctors warn over cancer op cancellations amid NHS pressure. In other words, doctors warn that people who need operations because they have cancer can't get them. They're being canceled. Hey, healthcare's a right, don't you know?
Boy, wouldn't it be awkward if we lived in a society right now where people can't get cancer treatment at all because they can't afford it? Boy, wouldn't it be really awkward if every problem you're pointing out exists with the NHS also exists in our healthcare system just for different reasons? Wouldn't that be really fucking silly if that was the case? But it is. It is the case. But you still haven't explained why it's not a right. You've just explained that there are complications. But complications are things you can get over as long as you've got a little bit of ingenuity, which, based on the quality of what I've heard from Mark Levin thus far, ingenuity does not seem to be his strong point. Just being really opinionated on why the status quo needs to be maintained, that seems to be his strong point.
Senior doctors say they're concerned about the number of cancer patients having their operations canceled amid tremendous pressure facing the NHS in England this winter. See, it's like the third world. Winter comes. Oh, my God, we're running out of syringes. Ian Erdley from the Royal College of Surgeons said a shortage of beds was one of the causes. Such surgery is usually protected under treatment time guidelines. The NHS said it was pulling out all the stops to ensure patients receive surgery as quickly as possible. A spokesman for the NHS England said there had been a steady increase in the number of operations over the last 15 years, and more people were surviving cancer than ever before. How come Bernie Sanders doesn't mention that nowhere on the planet do people have the best chance of surviving cancer than in the United States of America? Nowhere on the planet do people have the best chance of surviving heart disease than in the United States of America.
Really? Is that the case? Let's find out. Let's see here. Cancer. Mortality rate by country. Well, let's take a look. Wow. What an interesting thing. The mortality rate for breast cancer is lower in Spain. It is lower in Germany. It is lower in, let's see. We have the United States there. Let's go through. Australia has a lower rate for breast cancer mortality. Greece has the same rate. Sweden has a lower mortality rate. Finland has a lower mortality rate. New Zealand's a little higher. France is a little higher. Italy's a marginally higher. Portugal has a lower mortality rate. Canada's the same. Germany's higher. Japan has a drastically lower mortality rate for that. Spain has a lower mortality rate than that. Okay, let's try a different kind of cancer. Cervical cancer. Australia has a lower mortality rate. Know what? Here. We'll even throw this here so we can all look. We can all enjoy. Cervical cancer. Here's the mortality rate in the United States, right here. Australia, significantly lower over the last 20 years. Denmark. Denmark is higher. Greece. Greece is lower than us. Netherlands. They're lower. Sweden, about the same sometimes, lower sometimes, higher sometimes. Austria's higher. Finland, significantly lower. Ireland's higher. New Zealand's lower. United Kingdom, about the same. Belgium, about the same. France is lower. Italy's lower. Canada's lower. Germany's a little higher. Japan's a little higher. Spain's a little lower. What about colorectal cancer? United States. Sweden's higher. Netherlands higher. Greece is lower. Denmark, Austria's higher. In this one, we seem to actually be a little better than other countries. Surprisingly. So you've got one so far. We actually have a lower mortality rate than any country where colorectal cancer is concerned. But of the three on this sheet here, these three common types of cancers, in only one example does the United States have a lower mortality rate than other countries, all other countries, which is his claim. We only needed one country, but in most examples we found like 6 to 10 that had a lower mortality rate than the United States. And I'm sure that trend would continue as we looked at more and more different styles of cancer. You can't just say that America's the best thing in the world axiomatically. You can't just say that and not back it up with data. But it took me 2 minutes to look at the data for cancer and look at the data for cancer mortality rates and see that his argument's full of holes and bullshit. Why? Why is it so easy to find holes in the bullshit like this? It shouldn't be this easy. It shouldn't. And yet, here we are. Quesa with the 5,000. Suris, what he's saying is trickery because in most universal healthcare systems, stuff like plastic surgery and dentals are not covered, which is true. Trickster says he doesn't expect his audience to do his own research. Correct. It is no different than creationists saying, we expect to see evidence of a lot of things buried under the ground if a flood happened. We find a lot of things buried in the ground, therefore a flood happened. They don't expect their audience to actually dig into the details. Because in the details, that's where the devil is, right? The devil's in the details. When you look at the details behind stuff like this, you start to realize that, oh, this argument has more holes than a perfectly cured batch of Swiss cheese.
Everybody and anybody gets access to the same treatment just by walking into the emergency room. Guidelines for hospitals in England stipulate that cancer patients should be seen within 31 days and receive primary treatment within 62. In November 16th, the latest period which NHS figures are available, the 62-day target for treatment to start was missed, with 84% of patients being treated in that time frame instead of 85%. Mr. Erdley, vice president of RCS, said most hospitals were able to see more than 90% of the patients within that time period. But in the past year, it's been more difficult to achieve. And it goes on. You want to know why? They're running out of beds. Now, why are they running out of beds? Does anybody know? Because everybody has a right to health care. In the paradise that is the British healthcare system, more and more seniors remain in the hospitals longer than they need to. Do you want to know why? Because the government not only nationalized the healthcare system, they've nationalized senior care.
So, here's the thing when you try to make an argument like this. The answer then is not to say that, oh, everybody has a right to healthcare and that's why people can't get care. Do you know what that means? That means, now, granted, to your audience, who you obviously have no respect for because you assume they're going to be stupid enough to listen to what you're saying and not fact-check you. But what you're doing when you make an argument like this is you are arguing that because everybody has a right to health care, people who need it can't get it. So, if we live in a system where 50,000 people are sick and we have 600 beds in the hospital, right? 50,000 sick people, 600 beds in the hospital. Only 600 can be fit at a time. In one system, 450 of the beds are filled because only 450 of the 50,000 people were able to afford healthcare. Were able to afford those beds. We've still got beds. Look, we're better than the public healthcare system. Now, in the other system, 600 people are being helped out of the 50,000. In both systems, 50,000 people are sick. That figure has not changed. Nothing about that has changed. And yet, because the beds are full in the second system, in the publicly funded system, we can then say that's the reason people can't get help, that's bad. When in both systems there are 50,000 people sick. The only difference is more people are getting treated in the public one than in the private one. Now, why is that? Why do people find this type of argument convincing? Well, it's intuitive. It's intuitive to say that we don't have enough beds, so we have to make you sleep in a manger. That is intuitive. But it ignores all nuance. All of these arguments ignore nuance. When you ignore nuance in your argumentation, you inevitably will be spouting falsehoods because your argumentation is based on a false litmus test. Michael Cunning gets it right in the chat. Free beds is not a good litmus test for the prosperity of your healthcare system. At the end of the day, the answer to the problem is not make it private so people can't afford it and then you can use the 600 beds better. The answer is to build more beds. Funnel more taxpayer dollars into building another hospital so you can help more people. Put more public money into healthcare. Hire more people to become medical professionals, to volunteer. This is the same fucking shit we do with firefighters. When we don't have enough firefighters in an area, we have volunteer firefighters who go and help out. These are not hard things to do. They are just things that take time, money, and a willingness to help people. But it seems to me that people like Mark Levin would argue that that willingness to help people is a bad thing. The answer to the 5,000 sick and the 600 beds problem is not to make it to where the 5,000 sick can't afford healthcare. The answer to that is to make more fucking beds.
There's nowhere to send them. So they stay in the hospitals until they can find some place to send them outside the hospitals. And so the pressure keeps building and building and building. The demand cannot be met because centralized government cannot manage a complex system. It can't even manage the Obamacare website. It can't even give out driver's licenses competently. It runs tens of billions of dollars in debt every year. Money that's lost to waste, fraud, overlap, abuse. They don't even know.
Isn't it funny how he brings up national debt as if under conservative governments, consistently, we have not gone more and more in debt? Now, conservatism is supposed to be where you abolish more and more of your government. You get rid of government. Or some of the government. You have a small government that functions to serve the people, right? And yet, consistently, every time there is a conservative in office, our government spending goes through the roof. Why is that? Why is that? Because that seems to be the opposite of what should happen, and yet it's not.
But Bernie Sanders says the paradise that is the British healthcare system is an absolute human right.
He didn't say that the British healthcare system is a paradise. You are strawmanning. And that seems to be the only functional way you can create an argument. Through ad hom, through guilt by association, through strawmanning. Literally everything you've done is a form of logical fallacy that can be seen by somebody who hasn't even gone to school for this. I am an autodidact on philosophy, on debate, on informal logic, which is where you get your fallacies birthed. And I can spot this shit. Why can someone with no education spot the problems in your argument? Why is it that a 6-year-old's basic solution answers the problems that you're grappling with? Dominic Craig for the $2 super chat. Small government of conservatism is absolute BS. Currently, yes. That seems to be the case.
You have a human right to wait in line to get a cancer operation and die while you're waiting. Now imagine if it's not cancer. Imagine if you have a broken hip. Imagine if you broke your leg or your arm.
Yeah, imagine. Thousands of Americans that can't afford health care can already imagine that.
And what about the diagnosis? How long does that take to get? Oh, this is a humane system, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely humane. It is a sick ideology on the left. Marxism, communism, socialism, call it whatever you want. It is a sick ideology.
He says call it whatever you want because him and his audience can't differentiate between those three concepts. A Marxist is a type of revolutionary that is going to try to actively transit the state into the system that they want. A communist simply advocates for that type of economic system, regardless of through reform or revolution. Socialist, same deal. Communist socialist, Marxist, these are all things that have their own definitions. This is a type of person who would argue, what's the difference? They're all bad. They're all the same. He can only paint his enemies a particular color, but he can't actually name them. He can't actually name why they're his enemies. And that seems to be a common thread, and it's an annoying thread.
Society after society that has gone in that direction, every one of them has paid a severe price in human lives and the quality of life. And this fool dares to say that Americans aren't compassionate. I would also remind Bernie Sanders, the communist that he is.
But he's not a communist. You keep calling him something that he's not, and you have yet to provide any evidence as to why he is that thing. That seems to be problematic to me.
That we have young men and women overseas, not his children or grandchildren. We have young men and women overseas defending people they don't even know in one hellhole after another. And so many have perished. And so many have been severely wounded. I find nothing but contempt for this man.
And this is our appeal to emotions fallacy. He wants to end his argument by tugging on your heartstrings. He wants to make you feel a certain way. Feel for the people that we've sent overseas. Let's ignore the fact that the system we've used to send those people overseas is funded in the exact same way that Bernie would have medical funded. Let's ignore that. Because if we ignore that, we can then appeal to the military because we in the United States view the military as a type of axiom at the foundation of our society. It's the military that helped us get through the revolution, right? We have a very high opinion of the military here in the States. I'm from a military family. I have a high opinion of the military. My argument is that we can use the same tools that have functionally given us one of the best militaries in the world and use it to create one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It takes the same tools being applied the same way. It just requires you to care more about saving people and not killing them. And yet, we still get the appeal to emotion. We still get the fallacy at the end. Over and above every fallacy we have heard him say throughout the entirety of this tirade.
Full contempt for Bernie Sanders. And Tom Price did a hell of a good job trying to fend off this kind of a communist kook. Go ahead.
And half of our senior older workers have nothing set aside for retirement.
Whoa. So people don't put money aside for retirement. Is that my fault?
Nobody said it's your fault. Nobody said it's your fault, but the thing is that we used to have pensions. We used to have pensions for our seniors. When you try to make the argument earlier in your own speech that Americans are compassionate people, and then the minute that he asks you, after you've emotionally manipulated your audience, the minute that somebody says, we can't take care of our elderly, some of the most vulnerable people, some of the people who have sacrificed the most for our country because they've been around the longest to do so. When you try to argue that Americans are the most compassionate people, but the minute that he brings up the most vulnerable people in our country, your response is that my fault? At that point, I think that you are a living example of why Bernie was right when he said that we are not a compassionate people. You are a functional living example of this. You're not a compassionate person. The minute that it was asked of you, not the other way around, when it was convenient for you to manipulate your audience, the minute it was asked of you to be compassionate, you said, "Is that my fault?" Nobody said it was your fault. They asked you to be a good fucking Christian and be a good Samaritan. To follow the principles that you're supposed to have as a conservative Christian. And yet, here we are, living in the world where you don't. I want to quote Ebenezer Scrooge, because that's what I get from Mark Levin. This is a quote from Ebenezer Scrooge in The Christmas Carol. "If they would rather die, to the poor," said Scrooge, "they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December." When Scrooge was asked to donate to a charity for people who were in need. Scrooge changed in that story, and I honestly think that someone like Mark Levin could and should. But the point of that story was to show that when you are not willing to have that compassion, that you are functionally no better than every bad ad hominem argument you've tried to make against your interlocutors.